If you're on this video, you want a cheat code defense nobody else in your league knows about that'll get you 20 plus points and win you a week in a league single-handedly. But lucky for you, you made all of the right decisions to find this video, and that's exactly what I'm going to be giving you guys right now. I hate to waste people's time. Make sure to hit that like button if you are feeling generous. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video because I'll be going over my top 10 defenses in general. That way there's no confusion about who you should pick up, who you should start, this and that. But the number one defense we need to be going through and getting off the waivers that is barely rostered, and they are a top 5 defense, so that's a little bit of a sneak peek to the top 10 list later in the video, is the Jaguars defense. They are an amazing play this week for a whole bunch of reasons, but the main one being is that they get a matchup against the Panthers this week, who have continued to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Now, if you look at last week, you're going to disagree with me on that, but don't let that game last week confuse you in any way. That was their highest scoring game of the week, and nobody expected them to put up 30 points. They still lost. Now they're coming into the matchup this week against the Jaguars, and the game total is 38.5. And all that essentially means is that the point total combined of both of these teams is only going to equal 38 points. And in the NFL terms of game scripts and sports books, that's one of the lowest lines that you can really get. Then your next question might be, well, why does it matter if it's a low scoring game? What does that mean for defenses? Well, the first thing is, if you score less points, your defense scores more points. We can expect less passing yards, which means less offense and less scoring, and obviously more fantasy points that way. But the other half of it, which is a bit more of an assumption, but more of a calculated statistical assumption, is that if there's a lower scoring game, you can predict more sacks and more turnovers because nobody's scoring points or getting in the red zone to get in that situation in the first place. And obviously the easy half of it is that the Jaguars are 8-point favorites. And when you're 8-point favorites in a 38-point total game, which is already extremely low, the Panthers are barely projected to even score 7 points. The sportsbooks are essentially handing us this one, and we all know that Vegas, all these odds know way more than we ever could, so it's nice to follow those things and get the safety blanket in that way. And it's not like the Jaguars defense is atrocious on their own. They're a solid unit. They have a great defensive line, and that's great when you get a matchup against the Panthers, who have one of, if not the worst offensive lines in the NFL. The strengths play perfectly into the weaknesses. Bryce Young's only projected for 190 passing yards, not even capping up to 200. That again is extremely low. This offense is not projected to do much. It's a super safe defense that also has a great amount of upside as well. And if you have any questions about who to start, sit, what defenses to add, pick up, any of that stuff, comment it while you are watching this video, and I will go down and answer 100% of them. I love to give back to you guys. That is the one way that I can answer your questions specifically. Super easy. Go ahead and comment if you got any questions. So the second best defense we want to go ahead and be adding is the Denver Broncos, and this is one that might be a little tougher to get in a lot of leagues, but if you've been around this page for long enough, you've had them for a long time for this moment exactly. And the reason is because they get a matchup against the Chargers, who have been falling off as of late. They've been averaging 16 points a game since Easton Stick took over as the starting QB, and now they get a matchup against the Broncos, who have one of the better, more solid defenses in the NFL on their own. The Broncos allow the 5th least points to wide receivers and also very little points to quarterbacks. And the interesting thing here is that the Broncos were 6-point favorites in this game, and then Russell Wilson got cut, and now they're 3.5-point favorites, still favored to win, but the game total is only at 37.5. That is again extremely low. Not much offense projected to be scored here, but that's not really something we have to worry about. In the other defenses, we were looking at 6-8-point favorites, but defenses can still be startable and viable and have a lot of upside if they aren't projected to blow out teams by 10 points. So that tells you if Jared Stidham is starting for the Broncos, they're still projected to win by 4 points. Easton Stick in this offense must be absolutely atrocious, and that is pretty much true. They're barely projected to score. Easton Stick is only projected for 200 passing yards, and in the realm of quarterbacks, that is one of the lowest, bottom of the barrel. And now that we have Jared Stidham starting for the Broncos, this might actually end up being a good thing because we're going to have less offense from the Broncos. If they're blowing a team out, other teams might have to pass more to stay up and keep competitive in this game, which is going to lead to maybe more points being scored. But instead, we have 2 terrible offenses against 1 really good defense. Not a whole bunch of points are going to be scored, so there's a lot of opportunities for sacks, turnovers, interceptions, all that stuff from Jared Stidham, and we can also be rewarded by the low points that the Chargers are probably going to score. And again, the Broncos are a solid unit on their own, especially in fantasy football defense terms. Outside of Week 15, where they scored -2 points, they've been a top defense. And it's not like the -2 points in Week 15 is something to worry about. It was against the Lions, one of the best offenses in the NFL. Essentially a throwaway game. The Chargers are nowhere near them. They are one of the worst offenses in the NFL. It's a safe play, high upside play. Go ahead and start them if they are available. But the next waiver wire defense that I actually really do love when we get deeper into the actual stats of this game is the Seattle Seahawks, and let me explain why I like them so much. They're playing at home against the Steelers, and you might be a little bit hesitant to start them because you're thinking, wait a minute, I remember the Steelers just had a really good game. Why are we going to be starting them? Mason Rudolph looks like him. But to that I say, that's just regular quarterback volatility. A countless amount of times in the history of the NFL, especially this season, we see a backup come in mid-game and do really good, or even a backup come in their first game and do really good. And the reason for that is because because teams don't usually game plan for backup quarterbacks. They game plan for the Russell Wilsons, for the Joe Burrows, not for the Jake Brownings and the Jared Stidhams. So the first game and a half is usually a little bit more inflated than it actually is because nobody really knows what reads they're going to go to, how they're going to move in the pocket, what the progressions are going to look like. It's all just kind of thrown up in the air. So when we get these backup quarterbacks, a lot of volatility can come from that, and that's why we saw Mason Rudolph put up 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. But the reality of it is that really didn't mean much because the Bengals defense is not one of the best in the NFL. They're not very good. They're negative as of average points allowed in the NFL, and almost all of the Steelers offense in that game came from 4 or 5 chunk plays. But now the Seahawks get to game plan for Mason Rudolph, and this is why I'm really liking this game here. There's a 40-point projected game total here. The Seahawks are projected to win by 4 points. Not a blowout, but definitely not necessarily close. But Mason Rudolph is projected for 200 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception, back down to the regular fill-in backup quarterback range. And ever since Tariq Woolen came back for the Seahawks in week 3, they have allowed the #1 least amount of points on go routes and downfield plays. And you might be asking, why is it important that the Seahawks take away go routes? And the reason for that is because that essentially takes away George Pickens from this offense. He is their deep threat. He is their guy that takes the top off of defenses. When you don't have that guy, your offense is going to be very one-dimensional, very predictable. And 29% of George Pickens' fantasy points this season has come on 4 plays, and 32% of those were go routes. So it's safe to say if you take out the player that had over half the yardage and the targets and the offense in general, you're going to be struggling. Again, it's going to be one-dimensional. They're going to be very predictable. And this is why you can't always just look at the points allowed to wide receivers and quarterbacks when you're picking a defense, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just like the total season projections. Again, you never really know what a backup quarterback is capable of, but more likely than not, it's going to be a negative outcome. So go ahead and get them off the waivers. I guarantee you they're barely going to be rostered because people are going to look at what these Steelers did last week and think they're a bad play. It's going to be an easy move. But the Rams defense is another one that I really am loving. And this team is a little bit confusing because they are one of the best first half defenses in the entire NFL. But then they start to kind of taper off towards the end of the games. They went up big on the Saints last week. They went up extremely big on the Commanders the week before that and almost let them come back and win. And that's not something necessarily fluky and new for the Rams. It's been happening a lot this season. But if they can just stop that one time, they're going to be a complete boom upside fantasy defense. And if you're going to bank on that to just happen one time and just push enough to get a good defense for 2 quarters, 2 halves, it's going to be this week where they're playing for a playoff spot. This is a must-win game against a terrible offense in the Giants. They're projected to win this game by 6 points, and it's on the lower side of game totals at 40 points. It's a great mixture storm of fantasy points for the Rams defense. And the Rams are essentially coming off a mini bye week because they played on Thursday, so they get an extra 3 days. They should be rested, have a game plan, be ready, and it's not like there's that much to game plan against because you're playing against Tyrod Taylor. Now, he is the starting quarterback over Tommy DeVito. That is an upgrade for them. He is a better fantasy and real-life quarterback than DeVito is. But again, the sportsbooks are telling us that really doesn't matter that much because they're still barely projected to score at all. The Rams have one of the best defensive lines in the NFL and a great run defense, and that's amazing when your strengths match up perfectly with what the Giants actually want to do in Saquon Barkley. He's really the only thing you have to worry about when you're going against the Giants. If you can stop Saquon, you can essentially stop the entire offense in general. It's one of the safer matchups you can find on the waiver wire because the Giants still one of the worst offenses in the NFL. But the next defense, another great option that I talked about earlier in the week before, is the Chicago Bears. They're still a great addable defense. They're hosting Taylor Heineke and the Atlanta Falcons, which might seem, again, like a bit of a risky play because they put up 30 points on the Colts last week, but it's not at all a risky move. This game has a projected game total of 37 points. That is extremely low. So use that as a safe floor that none of these teams are going to actually score. And if we know anything about Taylor Heineke, it's that he's going to make a lot of mistakes. And I have a jersey back there of Chase Young with Taylor Heineke's signature on it. I am a Commanders fan, unfortunately, so if anybody's going to know about this, it's going to be me. Taylor Heineke makes a whole bunch of mistakes. One day he'll have an amazing game, look like a prime quarterback. The next day he'll look like Zach Wilson, be absolute trash. And you really can't expect him to be amazing 2 games in a row. He just put up 30 points. That's not going to happen again. Even the sportsbooks lines are projecting this game to be low. The Bears are 3-point favorites. It's not like their team and offense is insanely great in general, but their defense has been more positive as of late. They are #1 in takeaways over the last 4 weeks, and they've been a top 5 defense in the entire NFL as far as fantasy points go since week 11. They're a safe play, they're a decent play, and they get a great matchup against the Falcons, which really isn't one we have to worry about too much. Heineke's only projected for 205 passing yards. I don't expect this game to be much of a blowout. The Bears are only favored by 3 points to win this game, which kind of eliminates the possibility of Taylor Heineke just absolutely slinging it Fant going for as many passing yards as he possibly can to stay up and stay competitive in this game, which again, that could lead to more points. It could also lead to more sacks. Again, it's just way safer. And when you're playing in a game with as low of a point total as this, you don't really need to bank on the low scoring because it's already a given. And if you enjoy any kind of superstitions, you can't expect Montez Sweat to absolutely go for Taylor Heineke, get a sack on his old quarterback. It's one of those things that just happens. You can't expect a revenge sack in this game. The Bears also do get decent pressure on quarterbacks as well. But moving into another defense that can absolutely save us this week and get us 20 points if we need it and give us this fantasy football championship win is the Colts. And one of the reasons I really do like them is they have the #1 pressure rate in the NFL on quarterbacks. They are one of the best defenses at getting to the quarterback in the NFL, and that's great when you get a matchup against Aiden O'Connell, who is one of the more inexperienced quarterbacks in the NFL on one of the worst teams that doesn't have a great offensive line. He's gonna make mistakes. The Raiders are averaging about 2 to 3 sacks given up a game, which is a little bit better than average, but it matches up perfectly with the Colts defensive scheme. They pressure the quarterback a lot. O'Connell will be stressed in the pocket. The Colts are actually playing for something. They're playing for that last playoff spot. They're going to come in this game fuming, and they have a lot riding on this game because if they lose this game, they're essentially out of any playoff considerations. They're favored by 3.5 points. This game does have a 43-point total, which is about average in the league, so you really can't bank on the low scoring fantasy points that way. But again, if we've learned anything through this video, you don't necessarily need a low point total to be a decent defense. O'Connell is projected for a decent amount of passing volume and 225 passing yards. Again, that is kind of on the lower side, but about more towards average. We aren't playing for shutouts. We're playing for a bit more of turnovers and mistakes and sacks, which is going to make it a little bit more risky of a defense. But again, they can still be started, and they're one of the best waiver wire defenses you can go ahead and pick up. But the Texans defense is one that's a bit lower down the line of ones you can pick up off the waiver wire in terms of high upside, high floor. But they still are a great option this week. They get a great matchup against the Titans, which is one of the more slept on games. To go over the projections here, it's a 43-point game total, which is about average in the league. And also the Texans are projected to win this game by 5 points. But the good thing about this is that 5-point line is the line projected for CJ Stroud not playing this week. The Titans are top 10 in points allowed to opposing defenses, and they have been declining as of late. And if we get CJ Stroud playing in this game, expect them to be favored by about 6 or 7 points at least. And again, that can be good if you're favored because it means more dropbacks, sacks, all that kind of stuff I talked about earlier. But we also have Will Levis dealing with an ankle injury this week. He is most likely going to be playing, but there is a lot of reports coming out and saying that he does look like and will be less mobile in the pocket than usual. And this kind of reminds me of some other situations that we've seen before. When we saw Patrick Mahomes dealing with an ankle injury in the playoffs, he did not look like the same player. Then we had Joe Burrow in the earlier half of this season dealing with a calf injury. He looked like Zach Wilson. He was completely trash. Now, I'm not saying his injury is on the level of those guys or it's going to be the same situation because it's not, but we can assume that if you're a quarterback in the NFL and you have limited mobility and the general public can just know that, defenses are going to game plan for that and they're going to send more pressures. Will Levis is one of those quarterbacks that can move out of the pocket, can escape the pocket and make plays for himself, and not being mobile hurts that kind of quarterback a lot more than it does a Tom Brady, a pocket sitter, a pocket passer. So I'm not saying this injury is the end of the world, but it does give this defense a little bit of an edge and a little bit of a boost, so you could expect more sacks to come out of it. And the Texans are playing at home, which is a positive. They are a better defense at home. But that is going to finish off this video of the top defenses we can be going through, picking up and winning a week with. I seriously wish you guys luck this week in fantasy football. Get that win. Let me know how you did, and I will see you guys in the start sit video coming later tomorrow.